Hello, everybody, boys and girls, beautiful people of the internet. Today, we're going to be talking about the Second Amendment. We're going to be talking about its purpose, its history while it was constructed, the history of militias, and the history of Northern European tribes that ultimately cultivated the culture that created the Second Amendment and the militia doctrine. All right, so for starts here, as we can see, we're going to talk about the Second Amendment in itself, right? So that reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Let's break that down section by section. A well-regulated militia. I will explain this more in detail in just a moment if you're reading ahead, as you can already tell. But ultimately, as we'll come to find out by the end of this video, a militia is clearly understood and defined as non-government sponsored soldiers. So the government isn't in control of them directly, the government doesn't fund them, the government doesn't control their training. They are citizens, and they are equipped and capable to execute military level tactics, engagements, problem solving, right? To be capable and adequate in arms and ability as a modern military of their time. Well regulated is in reference to the fact that they should be indeed that, well equipped and well able, right? They need to have the equipment and they need to have the skill set that would make them well regulated. So, a well-regulated militia is a quality, citizen-based, soldiering class of individuals. Okay, a non-standing army, a citizen army. That thing, a well-regulated militia, being necessary, right? Fundamentally have to have this thing. Without it, you will not get the following. Being necessary to the security of a free state, comma. Okay, so that first clause there, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. So if you want to have a free state and you want it to be secure, the citizens, the capable citizens of that free state need to be themselves a well-regulated militia. Man, that one is tongue-tying me up, huh? All right, the next clause here. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So what we can decipher from this is the first clause is the primary objective. We have a free state. That's what we're developing. We want it, and we need it to also be secure. Therefore, what must we have? What is necessary to do that? A well-regulated militia. Okay, wonderful. That's the focus. That's the purpose. The follow on, the next, what comes after that comma, the next phrase. It's like 3:30 in the morning. Everybody, please excuse me. Is in order to allow the first phrase, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is in order to allow them to be a well-regulated militia, because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. Wonderful. All right, if you want to look this link up here, it will come and it will provide you with this information. All right, the following are taken from the Oxford English Dictionary and the bracket of that dictionary and this definition in the time of the writing of the Second Amendment. Okay, so 1709. If a liberal education has formed in us well-regulated appetites and worthy inclinations. All right, so that's not talking about the government at all. The equation of time is the adjustment of the difference of time as shown by a well-regulated clock and a true sundial, 1812. Right. In summary, the phrase well-regulated was in common use long before 1789, which is when the Second Amendment was drafted, and remained so for more than a century thereafter. It referred to the property of something being in proper working order, something that was well-regulated, was calibrated correctly, functioning as expected. So it has nothing to do with government oversight, nothing to do with government funding, nothing to do with any of that. The National Guard is not a well-regulated militia. They are a branch of the military. All right. The writing of the Bill of Rights itself. Okay, if you click this link here, or go to this link here yourself, you will see more information than even this, but we're just going to cover the information provided that I wanted to highlight. Following the Revolutionary War, several states codified constitutional arms-bearing rights in context that echoed these concerns. For instances, this article of the Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights, 1776, read, "The people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, and as standing armies in the time of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not be kept up, and that the military should be kept under strict subordination and governed by the civil power." Okay, so this Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights that they wrote in 1776 is clearly outlining that the point of the people having arms is to defend not only themselves, but the what do they call the state, right? That's what I thought. Defense of themselves and the state. And they highlight that standing armies, they're not a fan of them. Standing armies are an enemy of liberty, and therefore we have to be in control of the military when it does exist, and we have to have a militia because we don't want an army to always exist, right? That's what the Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights read in 1776. Similarly, as another example, Massachusetts Declaration of Rights from 1780 provided, "The people have a right to keep and bear arms. The people have a right to keep and bear arms for the common defense. And as in time of peace, armies are dangerous to liberty. They ought not to be maintained without the constant legislature, and the military power shall always be held in an exact subordination to the civil authority and governed by it." So different verbiage, but very similarly. Not a fan of standing armies. We need to have militia for the common defense, and the citizens need to be in control of the military. All right. In 1789, James Madison produced the initial draft of the Second Amendment as follows: "The rights of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free state, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person." All right, so James Madison is the father of the Second Amendment. His original draft, very similar. They had the clauses switched around, right? So he wanted to solidify the right of the people to bear arms. And then next he covered that not only did they need to be well-regulated in good working order, militias, but they also needed to be well-armed. So the original drafter of the Constitution was specifically trying to outline that militias needed to not only be well-regulated, but highly armed, well-armed, armed in equality to that of standing militaries. They're being necessary, they're being best for the security of a free country. They later changed that to necessary. And then we'll read on here a little bit more. They had a lot of worries about people being compelled, religious people being compelled to be in the militia by they were worried people would be forced to be in the militia that were conscientious objectors, essentially. So they wanted to make sure that wasn't going to happen. That's how serious they took the militia, that they were worried that people's, priests were going to be forced into militia duty by their cultures and their local governments. Later, they just removed that clause, right? As resolved by the House of Representatives in August 24, 1789, the version of the Second Amendment sent to the Senate remained similar to the version initially drafted by James Madison, with one of the largest changes being the reordering of the first two clauses. At that time, it read, "A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people." So here we see, in this version of the Second Amendment, they're highlighting that it's composed of the body of the people. It's of the people. It's not of government employees. It's of everyday citizens. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, being the best security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But no one, religiously scrupulous of bearing arms, shall be compelled to render military service in person. Okay? The amendment would take what would become its final form in the Senate, where the religious objector clause was finally removed and several other phrases were modified. For instance, the phrase referencing militias as comprised of the body of the people was struck. The descriptor of the militia as the best for the security of the state was modified to necessary. Several other changes were proposed and rejected, including adding limitations to the standing army in times of peace, should have put that one in there, and adding next to the words bear arms in the phrase for the common defense, right? So we can see with most of these changes that were made and how this process went, where their mindset was at. They didn't like standing armies. They wanted common citizens to be equal and able as a military, all right? And that's why you're allowed to bear arms. That is the purpose of it, so that you can defend the community, so that you can defend the state, so that you, the common citizen who's armed and trained and capable, can stand up as a military. All right, there's several quotes from several different of the founding fathers around the time of the drafting of the Second Amendment and just after. I'm not going to read every single one of these, but I'll read a couple from each page and leave it up there. You can pause the video and read them yourself. Right. None but an armed nation can dispense with a standing army. Thomas Jefferson. A militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves and include all men capable of bearing arms. Richard Henry Lee. Always remember that an armed and trained militia is the firmest bulwark of republics, that without standing armies their liberty can never be in danger, nor with large ones safe. James Madison, First Inaugural Address, March 4th, 1809. Whenever governments mean to invade the rights and liberties of people, they always attempt to destroy the militia in order to raise an army upon their ruins. Representative Eldridge Gary of Massachusetts, spoken during the floor debate over the Second Amendment itself in the Annals of Congress, August 17, 1789. Oh, should have fine times. Oh, sir, we have fine times indeed. If to punish tyrants it were only sufficient to assemble the people, your arms, wherewith you could defend yourselves, are gone, and you have no longer an aristocratical, no longer a democratical spirit. Did you ever read any revolution in a nation brought about by the punishment of those in power, inflicted by those who had no power at all? Patrick Henry, Speech to Virginia, Ratifying Convention, June 5th, 1788. Before standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom of Europe. Some power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, because the whole body of the people are armed, and constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops that can be, on any persistence, raised in the United States. Noah Webster. The right of self-defense never ceases. It is among the most sacred and alike necessary to nations and to individuals. James Monroe. The great object is that every man be armed. Every one who is able may have a gun. Patrick Henry, Speech, June 14th, 1788. Ultimate authority resides in the people alone. The advantage of being armed, which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, forms a barrier against the enterprise of ambition. James Madison. All right, so I think it's pretty clear to see. You can go ahead and use the Google machines yourself and see that there are tons of individuals, basically all of the founding fathers, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists alike, strongly agreed that people should be armed. Standing armies are dangerous. I don't know how much more clear I can make this thing, guys. All right, let's go over the history of militias in America. The colonies of America started to be founded from European nations in the 1600s. Separated from their host nation, they relied on local militias for security and defense against natives. During the French and Indian War, militias were used successfully. Though large portions of the fighting were done by proper British troops, the use of colonial rangers was instrumental to Britain's success. Additionally, many militiamen were hired by the Crown to be provincial troops, colonists with short military contracts, outfitted and funded by Britain, recruited from militias. But any time a soldier received proper funding from the Crown, he was no longer considered or called a militiaman. Lexington and Concord. Here's another link for you. Militias mostly trained on a seasonal basis, but Minutemen companies were established to provide more regular training, sometimes weekly. The best of men in the militia, they were the best of men in the militia. They were expected to respond quickly in danger at a minute's notice, hence their name. Some of the first Minutemen companies were created in Worcester, Massachusetts, in September of 1774. Soon the Massachusetts Provincial Congress adopted the organizational structure for all Massachusetts militia units. In October that same year, other New England colonies began to do the same. Some of these units were in action on April 19, 1775. That's the Battle of Lexington and Concord. But contrary to popular thought, most of the colonial units that responded that day were not Minutemen companies, but regular militias. Though most Minutemen companies were formed in New England states, some similar groups popped up in other colonies, one of the more famous ones being Culpeper, Virginia Minutemen, which fought at the Battle of Great Bridge on December 9th, 1775. By 1776, however, most Minutemen units were disbanded, with many of these members joining other units. This was due mostly to the creation of the professional army, the colonial army. Now the militias would serve in support role of the Continental Army rather than the main militia force, as it was in 1775. All right, so again, all throughout, as this is referencing, all throughout the Revolutionary War, just like the French and Indian War, anytime a militiaman actually signed up and started receiving money and funding and training and equipment from the government, they were no longer considered a militiaman. They were now an actual member of the colonial army. Okay? This is all to outline that when they said the word militia, they had a very specific meaning, and it was somebody that was not funded by the government. All right. Let's talk about something that might upset some people, but it is facts, so I'm sorry to tell you. Let's go talk about European culture and history, going way back when. All right. Before we talk about this, actually, let me give you a little timeline to keep in mind. Rome collapsed in the year 476. England, as a kingdom, the Kingdom of England, united in the 1100s. The Kingdom of England established a parliament, a permanent parliament that's existed ever since then, in 1300s. And the UK united as we know it today, unifying all those islands right there, in 1707. And remember, we started colonizing America in the early 1600s, actually the late 1500s, early 1600s. Right, keep that in mind as we talk about that, right? America was originally colonized by English, Irish, Scottish, German, Dutch, and other northern European tribes. Mediterranean individuals, such as Italians and other southern European peoples, did not migrate to America in large numbers. until the late 1800s, the 1880s, I believe. Long, 100 years after the establishment of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Thus, their culture had very little influence on its creation. Greek and Roman democracies, which a lot of people, just the general thought is that we descend from Greek and Roman democracy, that they created democracy in America as the most modern iteration of that. And I contest that theory. Greek and Roman democracies were aristocratic and excessively political in nature. These cultures had huge numbers of slaves that were able to do the majority of all laborious jobs required. It was a society of powerful people, of the powerful and wealthy, maintaining dominance of the slave class. Each empire had a large standing army and did not allow the common person, slaves, to train martially. Northern Europe, in contrast, Northern European tribes at that time had no formal government or standing armies. Rather, they had variations of more true democratic republics with voting, centered around free men joining in the war band for local defense and raiding. It is these fierce Northern European war tribes that gave Rome so much difficulty in their expansion and were a contributing factor in its eventual collapse. After Rome's collapse, 476, these Northern European war tribes slowly accepted Christianity and turned into feudalistic fiefdoms, 1100s, 1300s. There were still no standing armies. Lords were responsible for arming and training the appropriate men under their charge. Large armies had to be raised by joining several small feudal armies under a single cause. The classic fantasy trope of rally the bannermen, that scene from fantasy films, comes from this time period. There was not a large standing army that the king could just decree in one moment, this is what we're doing now. He had to go to each of his individual lords and convince them to get their bannermen, and they had to go convince all their knights and all their different fiefdoms to get band together, bring them all together for this common goal. And if enough people from one crew voted not to go, didn't want to do it, they wouldn't fucking show up. The war band voted not to come. They're not here. That war tribe's not coming. Is what it is. And that's the way we've been running it since before history in Northern Europe. All right. It wasn't until the English Civil War in the 1640s, after we already started sending colonists to America, that our culture, Northern European culture that I believe America is descended from, had a standing army, right? It wasn't until the English Civil War in the 1640s that our culture had a standing army, when the English Parliament created a new model army. After the conclusion of the Civil War, the militia continued to exist alongside, but separate from the English standing army. Again, colonization of the Americas started in the late 1500s and the early 1600s. So we can see that from way back when, before we were even writing stuff down, the culture of Northern Europeans, that was the same culture of the individuals that wrote the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and fought for the Revolutionary War and all that, was such that they had, they didn't call it a democratic republic, but it was such that there was some set rules, and then within those set rules, all the crew would get together and vote on what they would do and handle business based on how they voted. Right? And that is the foundation, the rudimentary version of how our government is established. All right. So some common things you'll hear people say. You'll hear people say the 2A is about hunting, or it's about sporting, or it's about whatever. Anything other than defending freedom from tyrants and standing armies. And clearly, as I just talked about for the last 20 minutes, that's not true. It is for sure, according to culture, history, tradition, all the previous versions before the final draft, and the words of all the people that wrote it themselves, it's there to defend against tyrannical standing armies. All right. The founders, another one you hear all the time, the founders couldn't imagine AR-15s. Oh my God, AR-15s are so terribly violent. They could never imagine such a thing. Right, the founders participated in warfare equivalent in violence to modern times. They fought in the Revolutionary War. They were personally aware of the horrors of war. They did this before they wrote the Second Amendment. Okay, and they fully supported the citizens being capable of military in arms and ability. Additionally, privateering had been around since the 1300s. Privateering is the act of using private sea-bound ships as commerce pirates, mercenaries, against host nation enemies. It was a common practice, right? So, hey, I transport goods back and forth for England, but also on the side, if I happen to see a Portuguese or a French ship, I'll blow those assholes out of the water with cannons. And then the English crown will give me some money, and if I can collect any booty from the ship, I can keep that myself as well. All right? They were aware of what citizens owning military-style arms would entail. They were well aware of it. It was part of their culture. It had always been part of their culture. All right, another one you hear all the time. You can't fight a jet with an AR-15. Well, unfortunately, that's simply not true. As it has been proven time and time again in the last 100 years, a determined, lesser-equipped local population only has to outlast the superior force, or make it uneconomical for them to continue to fight. They simply must endure until the conflict is no longer profitable or popular. You can absolutely win a war against jets with nothing but small arms. It has been done several times. So, why, kids? Why is it that we have the Second Amendment? We have the Second Amendment so that our government can't become tyrannical and use a standing military to boss the people around. And what does that mean? That means that it's your duty as an able-bodied citizen to be prepared and trained and equipped as a basic military force in order to do that in times of peace and in times of worry. It's your duty. It's your responsibility. That's why the Second Amendment's there. All right, kids. Go out there and take care of business.